Of all the Disney Plus shows we've seen so far, Loki seems to be the one that will have the biggest impact on the MCU moving forward. Season 1 introduced the MCU's new big bad, and ended by having all the timelines branch off from the sacred timeline. It had some intriguing ideas and a great cast. I love Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson together, but I did have some problems with it. There's something about the way it frames the first 3 phases of the MCU that makes it feel small and insignificant. For example, the TVA using Infinity Stones as paperweights, or tackling the concepts of free will versus the manipulation of the sacred timeline, and what was quote-unquote supposed to happen. I also wasn't crazy about how Loki himself was handled. Season 1 started with the Loki we knew from the original Avengers. He was vengeful, menacing, cunning, and power-hungry. But Season 1 of Loki quickly sheds that and turns him into a pretty average guy. While Sacred Timeline Loki went through actual character development over the years, this Loki went through artificial character development by basically just watching the highlights of phases 2 and 3 of the MCU. Of course, this is no fault of Tom Hiddleston, who I think turned in a great performance. Loki's unique abilities and powers are useless in the TVA, which is where the majority of the show is spent. This was a problem in Season 1, and it continues in the first episode of Season 2. I'll be talking about spoilers for the first episode of Season 2, so if you haven't seen it yet, this is your spoiler warning. Season 2 picks up right where we left off at the end of Season 1. Mobius and the rest of the TVA don't recognize Loki, and we see statues and murals of Kang the Conqueror everywhere. Some had theorized that this was an alternate timeline, but this episode confirms that it's actually the same timeline, just 400 years in the past. Kang openly ruled over the TVA before wiping everyone's memory and creating 3 fake gods, all while pulling the strings behind the scenes. Loki, meanwhile, keeps phasing in and out of time, seemingly randomly, but there's also strong hints that there could be a purpose behind it all. Between the name of Quan's character Ouroboros and the marketing itself, there seems to be a theme of cycles. For example, Loki first meets OB in the present, but then comes across him in the past, which then influences their discussion in the present. The main difference is that OB wears glasses in the present.
He was wearing reading glasses to show that time had passed.
Past, present, and future events all impact each other within the same timeline. The episode presents a number of different events that connect to one another, and time will tell if we see how all these pieces fit into the puzzle. The entire episode takes place in the TVA, which is disappointing to me because, like I mentioned earlier, it prevents Loki from using his abilities. Rather than being the god of mischief, he comes across as just a regular guy. For a show that deals with the multiverse and time travel, I'd expect to see a lot more weird, classic, and exotic locations. We got some of that, and perhaps we'll get more in the coming episodes of Season 2, but this first episode was a bit monotonous to me. And to be fair, there's a lot that the writers are setting up in this episode. There's a lot of interesting questions raised about characters like Kang, Renslayer, and Sylvie. Speaking of Kang, we don't see him in the flesh in this episode, but his presence looms through the statues throughout the TVA and his audio recording with Renslayer. I actually really like how they build up his presence here. It's pretty ominous, and could have even been more so if we hadn't already watched another Kang variant get defeated by ants earlier this year. Ouroboros, or OB for short, is an interesting new addition played by Quan, fresh off his Oscar-winning performance in another multiversal story. He was a bright spot in this episode, playing his role with a lot of energy and joy. His character was mainly meant to give exposition, not unlike his character in Everything Everywhere All at Once. But unlike that movie, where he efficiently explained the multiversal rules with clever analogies and visuals, OB's explanation of time travel in Loki tends to be a little too quick, wordy, and convoluted in my opinion. The way that time travel is explained in this episode also seems to contradict what we know from Endgame. In Endgame, we learn that influencing the past doesn't affect the future, it just branches off into another timeline. But here, we get moments where Loki clearly affects the past in the TVA, but it directly affects the future. Does this go against Endgame's rules?
Time travel!
Perhaps I missed something, and maybe the TVA has different rules about that sort of thing, but let me know in the comments if you have a good explanation for this. The mid-credit scene shows Sylvie, fresh off of killing He Who Remains. She ends up in rural USA in the 1980s and finds herself in a nice bit of product placement.
Get your Hanes on, lace up your Nikes, grab your Wheaties and your Gatorade, and we'll pick up a Big Mac on the way to the ballpark.
After being on the run her whole life and living only in apocalyptic worlds, she seems content to be in a time and reality that's peaceful. Not much else to say about this scene, it was just nice to get out of the TVA for a little while. So, there's my thoughts on episode 1 of Loki season 2. I'm pretty mixed on it, and I think this episode was mostly meant to set up a lot of different plot points that will hopefully pay off later. There are some intriguing ideas and questions raised, and I do enjoy the cast. I just hope that the show can meet its potential by exploring a lot more exotic locations, timelines, and allowing Loki some time out of the TVA where he can use his powers to their entirety. What were your thoughts? Did you enjoy this episode of Loki? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Ring that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a good one.